Welcome back to another presentation. Today we are covering the mastering of sports turf surface repair techniques. So this can be anything from divoting to returfing damaged areas. So why do we repair sports turf? So these are the key features we want to identify. Obviously, the importance of sports turf in athletic performance and safety. We're going to introduce the knowledge, skills, and behaviours for the level 2 and level 3 sports turf as well, which is K18, the operations and techniques for repairing damaged sports turf surfaces, and S8, which is to carry out repairs of sports turf surfaces using the relevant equipment and machinery. So this can be divoting, foothold repairs, and animal damage, for example. We want to have an emphasis on the impact of a timely repair and the maintenance on the longevity and usability of the sports turf surface. So why do we repair sports turf surfaces? Basically, the simple and short answer is we want the surface to be the highest possible standard available, and also, we want the player safety to be thought about and to be up there as one of the most important things. So a safe pitch is a good pitch. You see a picture here on the left and right. They're not the same place, but what you can see here on the left is a pitch which has probably had quite heavy use. With the line markings, they've stopped spraying, and it actually looks like they've sprinkled a chalk or some sort of uh, lime powder as opposed to marking out, because obviously it's not going to if you're using a wheel to wheel, for example, it wouldn't stick to the soil. Whereas if you're using a spray, you might get away with it a little bit better. But you can see there's a lot of areas which don't have any turf on them at all, and there's a lot of holes, a lot of divots, a lot of places where ankles can get caught, knee injuries, and so on and so forth. Whereas on the right, we have a more manicured surface. You can see the irrigations on. There is a few divots here down at the bottom, but on a whole, it's pretty uniform surface. So the three main types of damage we're going to cover in this presentation are divots, so from boots, from the players, tackles, those sort of things, footholds and ruts. So these are where the turf might be extremely soft and where a player is stops with momentum, stopped running, and the turf is pushed up. You can see there in the middle picture where it actually looks like they've returfed recently, and it's all pulled up during the rugby game. And then on the right, we have animal damage, which can be anything from holes, burrowing, to the molehills we also saw there. So the equipment and machinery is pretty simple. There's not a lot to it, to be honest. We're looking at things sort of divot forks, pitch mark repairers for golf greens, turf plugs or the transplanters, like the turf doctor just there in the middle and the top line. Anything that we can use to transplant surf. So you could use a spade realistically if you really wanted to. The turf cutters, so bottom left, yeah, just a bog standard turf cutting machine. Cut it into the rolls and then go and roll it out as and where you require it. And then leveling equipment, just the leveling loop rake that we have on the bottom. That's that black rake. So divot repairs for football and rugby, a little bit different than golf, and we'll go on to that in a second. First of all, we're going to talk through the process sort of step by step. So we want to assess the turf damage, assess what exactly might have caused the issue, but also how we can go about repairing it. So you can see in this divot on the right, it was probably done a while ago because there's actually seed which has started to grow within the divot. So that's obviously one way that we can repair it. If we know we don't have a game for a prolonged period of time, there's no reason why we can't go around and seed and top dress. But ultimately, we're thinking about, if we do have a game next week, what can we now do to this divot? So we can remove any loose turf, any issues, any bits that are sticking out. We could lift it if we needed to, if that turf had been pushed into the ground a little bit lighter up, but not so deep. We could then lift it with the fork and then use the fork to divot the turf in. So you see the red arrows from around the edges. We can divot that outer turf towards the hole and cover up that divot then. And then the last thing we usually do is just stand on it, just, roll your foot over it, just to ensure that it's level, because we're pulling all of that turf in from the edges. We want to make sure that we've not just left a hidden hole underneath. And if we have, then we might have to consider using some topsoil to just bring up the levels inside of that divot. Divots on a golf green. There's two methods again. Obviously, the main one would be to top dress with the little, you see there with the little trowel with some top dressing and seed. We do it this mainly sort of on fairways and tees, but on golf greens, obviously, we wouldn't be hitting with a club, so we're not going to be hitting. We're using a putter. We're not really swinging at it with an iron or a driver, or at least we shouldn't be. So the likelihood of a divot at the top right is very slim. But what we would do in the situations where we've got ball marks on the pitch is we would use a ball mark repairer to lift that divot, similar to like what we did on the football pitches, but it'd be a lot smaller. So we just lift that up, get rid of the decompaction underneath, and we'll be good to go. Footholes repairs and ruts. So these can be anything from players to the vehicles that are being across the pitches. So you can see in the top right, that's an area which has been top dressed and seeded. Some ruts from a vehicle, but whereas you look at the bottom right, that's what happens if you don't repair those ruts. So you can see the undulations in the surface where the grass is not grown to the same level because it's been pushed down on the rut. It's actually a couple of inches lower than the rest of the profile. So even after it's mown at a later date, you can still see that there's ruts in that surface, and they'll stay there until you get rid of them, basically. So again, we want to assess the damage, remove any loose turf, fork out and relieve any compaction, and then top dress with a root zone seed mixture, or we can returf those bare areas as well. So we've got the turf on the bottom left. These might not just be damages, we around on the sports pitches. We might have to consider things such as run-ups on cricket wickets. You can see in the middle picture we've got a little irrigation box, which is actually on a run-up to a wicket. Cost a lot of money to have it moved, so it's not something that we wanted to do. How can we ensure that sort of there's no footholes or any damage around that? We turfed it. We put an artificial piece of grass glued to the lid to sort of try and hide it, and it looks a lot nicer than that now, I can tell you, that's for sure. Animal damage. So depending on the type of damage will determine the repairs that we need to be carrying out. Molehills, for example, would need to be removed or spreaded, whereas tunnels or burrows would need to be filled with a top dress or seed mixture. On the top right, you can see chafer grub damage, which has been caused by wildlife, birds and badgers trying to find the chafer grubs and eat them. So they've pulled up a lot of the turf there, just under that tree. And then on the bottom right, we have the molehills that I mentioned earlier. So we identify the types of damage, repair the turf, and implement any deterrent measures. So with the molehills, might be underground fencing. With the chafer grub damage, can we make the environment less, less beneficial for the chafer grub? Can we, aerate more often, add some sand to the profile, just make it overall a less inhabitable surface for them and get them to move somewhere else. And then we can then remove the wildlife damage because there won't be any if there's no chafer grubs to eat. So best practices, regular inspections and maintenance. You can see that on the top right, Paul from Arsenal, Darryl from Sydney University, just checking over the pitch at the Emirates Stadium there, doing a little visual inspection, engaging with the groundskeepers, staff, players in the whole process. This can be anyone from the coaches, playing staff, and as I mentioned, the ground staff, and then educating the stakeholders on the importance of responsible use. So this is when we use the performance quality standards and the data that we've collected before or are still collecting to then go to the managers and say, this is what's happening to the pitch. This is why you're getting more injuries. We're not able to repair it as quickly. This is why it's too soft. This is why it's too hard. It's all important data that you should take into consideration. And finally, we just got a few useful links on the screen, which I'll also put in the video description. Just how to do some basic divoting. So that's from the GMA. That's a little video there. There's a link to that. Divots on golf courses, when to repair, when to replace, when to put that piece of divot back into the area that's being divoted with the iron, for example, or the driver. You can then get that strip of turf and put it back in place, or should you use your top dress and seed mixture to fill that hole? And then repairing with turf transplants. So this is using things such as the Hexagon Turf Doctor to repair whole areas. Say if you've got a tournament coming up next week, you want it to look as good as possible. So it might actually make more sense to just remove and replace. and tie in the corners and the edges, and you won't even notice that you've replaced it at all.